Volvo saved themselves from bankruptcy with the 700 series and the 850, but these cars propagated a boxy look that became the sort of thing that stand-up comedians ridiculed. What Volvo needed was a new direction, and the first car to use it was the S80. We're very lucky to have the person behind this new design, Volvo's lead designer Peter Horbury, to take us through the whole S80 story. So, where did this new look come from? What management shenanigans drove the decisions over how the S80 was designed? And how successful was it? This is the Volvo S80 story. For Volvo, concepts were more than outlandish creations that would never see the light of day. The VESC in 1972 hinted at the new 240 design and showed off safety ideas that would appear on the real car. The 1980 VCC showed what the new 740 would look like. The ACC in 2001 was a dead ringer for the XC90, and the SCC would show off ideas for the C30 that would appear 5 years later. Volvo had hired a new design director, Peter Horbury, and he decided that the 1992 ECC, or Environmental Concept Car, would showcase a new Volvo style. Peter's been very kind to sit down and talk more about the S80 and the ECC.
What really happened was that here was an opportunity to show something different as a design language for Volvo, because it was a one-off. This was a concept car, and it wasn't going to make or break the company. And I flew out on my first visit to this Volvo Monitoring and Concept Center. I went with the senior management, and it was there that I looked at some sketches on the wall, and there was one sketch which I just knew immediately, this is it. And the sketch was from Doug Frazier, who was a designer in the California studio then. And I saw it immediately that he got this flush front with the grille up front, and the shoulders, the flat-topped fenders and shoulders, and the V-shaped bonnet. And I saw immediately the PV544, but not just any PV544. It was the rally versions or the race versions where they took the bumpers off, and the grille low down was up front. And I just saw it immediately in this sketch. And I thought, well, we've got to make this. The PV had a flat top, then a radius, then pure vertical sides to the front fenders. And I always felt that that was very much in line with the Swedish furniture, where English furniture and American was all voluptuous big armchairs with rounded forms, rounded backs. The Swedes used bent wood, and that's the way bent wood turns out. It's that look which created this very unique shoulder on the ECC and therefore the S80. And to be honest, if you look back at the Volvo 140 and 240, it's there as well, all the way down the side. A flat surface coming away from the bottom of the windows, and then a radius, and then the vertical. On the interior, the top of the center console had an arc over it, which we took from Swedish architecture. Over the top of a window in Sweden, you don't get a Norman arch or a Gothic arch or anything else, or flat top. You get a slow curve, which is quite unique. Even if we were tearing up the Volvo design book, we were maintaining that Swedishness that I think gave us something exotic selling in the world.
Peter's predecessor was Jan Vilsgaard, a native Swede who designed almost all of Volvo's cars. Peter, a Brit, had big shoes to fill and had to persuade people that this new style was both Swedish and something befitting Volvo.
There was a mixture of people in the senior management at the time. There were, let's say, older and younger, and I did have a hard time in some cases to persuade them that it was time to move on. But you see, the boxy Volvos were not there forever, because Jan Vilsgaard designed the Amazon, which was anything but boxy. And I used that as a reason. And then with the Amazon and all its curves and roundedness and the pointed front, it was a way I could persuade them that we could look at the heritage beyond the 850, beyond the 760, and go back and recreate something which had a lot more shape, a lot more form. But I was also able to show them that we were true to the Volvo principles of the arc of the shoulders running all the way from the front to the back, and then what we call the Volvo bridge, which was the 3 side windows with a dog leg at the back, and the surface running either side of that, where on the 760 and the 960, they'd all been in one plane. I just moved them across to recreate that V shape of the Amazon and the trunk tucking in. But if you look directly from the side, you can see that Volvo look that was, to be honest, straight from the 960 and the 850, but given a more three-dimensional appearance.
The ECC might look humdrum now because we've seen so many cars on the road based on this style, but at the time it was a striking new design. But the ECC was also built to showcase a new powertrain.
To be honest, the idea was, it came from our, what we call the Volvo Monitoring and Concept Center in California. And they were working on a technology to create a hybrid vehicle. The idea being, and this is way back in 1991, that you could drive in, say we're in Los Angeles, you could drive in the city without any emissions whatsoever because you're using the battery. But then you could drive from Los Angeles to San Francisco using the powertrain, which in fact in that car it was a gas turbine. It could have been a diesel for all we know. But then when you got to San Francisco, you'd have enough electricity generated so that when you got to the city, you could drive through the city emission free. So that was the idea that we were working on way back in 1991. And I have to say, if we maintained that momentum with the project, hybrids would have been a Volvo mainstay much earlier than anybody else. But I think it perhaps was a little too complex at the time. There wasn't a readily available gas turbine engine being built. But as we've seen in recent years and decades, the petrol engine or the diesel engine has powered a hybrid drivetrain for some years now. It was certainly at the time a very new way of looking at lowering the emissions. And don't forget, it was really the cities, Los Angeles especially, where the smog and the emissions were a real problem.
Nickel-cadmium batteries powered the car for 90 miles, but delivered a slow 23-second 0 to 60 time. When aided by a gas turbine engine that charged the batteries and allowed for regenerative braking, the 0 to 60 time got to a more respectable 12.5 seconds. This eco-powertrain had one eye on new California emission rules. By 2003, 10% of a car manufacturer's sales had to be emissions-free according to these rules. It was a rule crafted after General Motors' progress on electric vehicles that resulted in the EV1. The ECC was Volvo's reaction to ensure that they could continue to sell cars in the lucrative California market into the 21st century, and it's surely no coincidence that it was developed at Volvo's studio in California. All Volvo had to do now, of course, was perfect a gas turbine engine and a hybrid powertrain, something that no other car company had done up until this point. And they had to do it for the introduction in 1998, just 6 years away, so no pressure then. Maybe a closer collaboration with Renault would help. The two companies had been moving closer together in the 1990s, and in 1993 a merger was tabled. Renault's management agreed to the deal, barely, but Volvo's management backed out. This put a spanner in the works for Volvo's development team.
And we were actually working on a new car based on the Safran platform. And then one day it all fell apart and the deal was off. So we had to, first of all, we had to facelift the old 960 as a stopgap while we found another platform to work on.
Volvo needed a new large luxury car, and that car needed a new platform. This wasn't a light decision. New platforms need extensive work and testing, so a small company such as Volvo had to think long and hard before committing to that expense. The new platform would be known as the P2.
So we developed the P2, which was based on the 850 platform, but moved on somewhat. So then we had a couple of years that we had to fill the gap with a facelift 960 and 850 and develop something totally new ourselves. But it gave us a lot of opportunity because the engines, we had a straight six. It was going to be a fairly upmarket car. But we turned the straight six around through 90 degrees. And that gave us the opportunity of bringing the screen forward. And I've been a big believer in this cockpit forward or cab forward look ever since Chrysler started it. Even if that was a windscreen forward and the people stayed further back, creating the biggest instrument panels or dashboards in the world. It had a look which, to me, was as exciting as a mid-engined Ferrari 250 LM. It created a new look, which I was a big fan of, and we've just launched the new Lotus Eletre, which follows that philosophy all the way. And that was going to give us a really nice balanced proportion where the cabin was set between the wheels and not slung over the rear axle quite so much as some of the competition. Now with electric power, you get all of that free, but to package a 6-cylinder engine in that way was the opportunity to create a new design language.
The gas turbine and hybrid powertrain of the ECC weren't seriously considered, and the need to fit them in California would diminish as the legislation would be rescinded, in part thanks to legal action from the company that caused it to appear in the first place, General Motors. Volvo didn't have the funds for a new engine, so they'd use the 5- and 6-cylinder versions of the Volvo modular engine, although Volvo claimed 90% of it was actually new. As Peter mentioned, the engine would be mounted transversely, which gave the car more interior space. This meant Volvo's new luxury cruiser would be front-wheel drive, when the competition were telling customers that true luxury cruisers had to be rear-wheel drive. Fitting the 6-cylinder transversely was a squeeze which required a new, smaller manual gearbox that Volvo touted as being the world's shortest, beating out the previous record holder, the gearbox that Volvo fitted to the 850. A twin-turbo option would also be available, developing 268 horsepower, getting to 60 in 7.2 seconds with an automatic gearbox. The 5-cylinder turbo with that new manual gearbox could get to 60 in 7.3 seconds. Volvo were also very proud of the new electrical system that utilised 18 computers, all connected through the new CAN bus. This was a system that would come to almost all vehicles to handle increasing computerization. Even the Morgan Plus 4 today has a diagnostic socket for its BMW engine. The Volvo team evaluated 4 designs for their new luxury cruiser, dubbed the S80. 3 were in the boxy vein of previous cars, but 1 followed the new design direction from the ECC. This was the chosen design and would set Volvo's design language for its upcoming range of cars. The shape didn't match the ECC's impressive 0.23 drag factor due to silly practicalities like comfortably accommodating tall rear passengers, but 0.28 was still impressive and helped to get the most out of those existing Volvo engines. The key phrase Volvo used for the S80 was understated prestige. The affluent customers that Volvo hoped to court didn't want to shout about their wealth with ostentatious bling. To underline this, the new S80 would only be produced as a saloon. But Volvo had to walk a line between affordability that the home market wanted and luxury that the export market demanded.
Volvo in Sweden had been more or less the people's car, the folkbil, as they say in Sweden. And it seemed to me that many people at Volvo felt there was a duty to supply Mr. and Mrs. Svensson's family car. So getting the company to move up market would then abandon that duty, let's call it. So there was some resistance to how far up market you could go. And it did, I think, hold us back a little bit in our quest to move into Mercedes territory, because there always had to be the 2.3 base model which would satisfy the local market.
But Volvo knew that moving upmarket was critical to their survival. It was a path they'd started with the 700 series, and in particular the Bertone-styled 780 Coupe in 1986. There was surely a hope that one day the Volvo brand would be held with the same regard as Mercedes-Benz, just as Audi had gained a boost in image in the 1980s. Volvo's luxury car needed to live up to those expectations inside the car as well, of course. Climate control, a premium audio system with 2 aerials for optimal reception, and the option of a mini disc player, or at least that's what Volvo's press information says. Let me know if you actually saw one of those in the wild. A mayday system to call in the event of an emergency, cruise control, heated seats, leather, wood and a navigation system all gave the S80 the feel of a limousine. Being a Volvo, it would naturally get all the latest safety features. A new generation of traction control kept the car on the road. The whiplash protection system helped with, you guessed it, whiplash protection by moving the backrest and head restraint together in an impact, and there would be a side impact airbag curtain. Volvo would herald the S80 as the safest car available. It was the first car to get a 5-star rating in North America. It got just 2 stars for pedestrian safety in Euro NCAP tests though, so probably better to be inside the S80 in the event of a crash than outside of it. The Volvo S80 launched in 1998, replacing the S90 as the top of Volvo's range. Sales were brisk, over 60,000 sold in the first year and almost 85,000 in the second year, as customers realised Volvo had produced a high-quality luxury cruiser that didn't break the bank. This wasn't your father's basic Volvo that looked like it had been styled by Picasso during his Cubist phase. Gas turbines and hybrid battery technology had been tested on the ECC, but Volvo hadn't given up on making a fuel-efficient car. They produced the obligatory diesel model, of course, sourcing the engine from Volkswagen and returning 43 miles per gallon. But they'd also produce a bi-fuel version, allowing the S80 to run on both gas and petrol. If you live in the USA, saying something runs on both gas and petrol is very confusing. Specifically, we're talking about compressed natural gas and liquefied natural gas. These conversions gained popularity in the late 1990s across Europe, but with large tanks taking up boot space and relatively few places to fill up, they didn't gain mass adoption. The S80 launch seemed to be smooth sailing, but at a corporate level it was all change. After spurning the Renault merger, Volvo went it alone, but it was always going to be hard to make a full range of cars as a relatively small car producer. The mood in the car industry at the time was merge or die. Renault and Nissan had their alliance, and Daimler and Chrysler had forged what looked like the perfect match. After serious but ultimately fruitless negotiations with Fiat, in 1999 Volvo announced their car division was being acquired by Ford, who would roll the company into their premier automotive group that included Jaguar, Land Rover and Aston Martin. This not only gave Volvo access to parts from these historic companies, but also Ford's US operation that included Lincoln. And the benefits cut both ways. Volvo had heavily invested in the S80 platform, and this would be ideal for cars under Ford's wing. To this end, the S80 platform will be used for the Ford Taurus, 500, plus Mercury versions of the same cars, the Freestyle, Flex and the Explorer. It also helped Ford's luxury car dreams. They'd ended Scorpio production just a few years earlier and were now pinning their hopes on Jaguar with the new S-Type, Range Rover, and now Volvo with the S80 to take on European and now Japanese luxury competition that were eating into sales not only in Europe but also in Ford's backyard. And the S80 platform would also renew Ford's domestic luxury brand, being used for the Lincoln MKS and MKT. Ford dreamt big as the new millennium dawned, with large increases in sales planned for every brand in the premier automotive group. Volvo's sales themselves were projected to grow by more than 40% in the next 5 years, and why not? Ford had expected the S-Type and the X-Type to be big sellers. BMW was on the ropes as Rover bled them dry, with companies like Fiat eyeing them for a buyout. Volvo seemed ripe for growth. They made good quality cars, and more customers wanted safer cars, as could be seen for their interest in the Euro NCAP ratings. The S80 executive would highlight Volvo's push into luxury, with heated rear seats, copious wood, a built-in refrigerator, TV with DVD, fax machine, and all with a smattering of cup holders for good measure. Volvo were known for safe cars, but the executive took it one step further with shatterproof windows and either light or full armour. Regular S80s got Volvo's all-wheel drive system adapted for the tight engine bay and transverse engine. And while the S80 was a large gas guzzler, it had been heralded as an eco-friendly car at launch. But this was more about it being easy to recycle than its tailpipe carbon emissions. Volvo also announced the Prem Air ozone-eating feature. A coating on the radiator would convert ozone into oxygen as air flowed through the radiator, so in essence you were saving the planet the more that you drove your S80. But it's clear that Volvo were trying to do what it could to be better to the planet given the constraints it had. There just wasn't money to build a new engine that could run on water, for example. But with Ford's help, Volvo's range increased with the help of the new S80 platform.
Well, the S80 begat the S60, the V70, and the XC90. But one of the issues there was that it's much easier to start with the lower car, the smaller car, let's say, or the cheaper, the less expensive car, and then add on to it to create the most expensive. What we did, we started off with the S80, the top of the line, and then we had to try and reduce that to make a cheaper S60, V70. So that was a little bit of an issue.
The S80 got a few small exterior changes for the 2003 mid-cycle refresh, but Volvo were mainly focused on developing the second generation car, hoping this would improve sales that had tailed off somewhat as customers gravitated to the new XC90. Ford dictated that the new car should use their existing EUCD platform that was used for the Mondeo, S-Max, Galaxy and the Land Rover Freelander. In fact, Volvo claimed 80% of the parts of the new S80 was shared with the Ford S-Max and Galaxy, two very different vehicles. But it just made sense to drive economies of scale, and that was why Ford had bought up so many car companies like properties on a monopoly board. Surely the largest company would end up victorious.
Yeah, and Ford are great at making money, and that was the directive that we should use this platform. But it was always going to be an issue to create a luxury or anywhere near a luxury car that was that much smaller in width. I think it was a very nice, very competent design, but by then the BMW had set the scene with zero front overhang, the front wheel way beyond the front door shut line, or dash to axle as we called it, and that was the very popular format for cars. Even Audi had a problem with the length of their front overhangs around the same time. It was never seen to be truly a Mercedes BMW competitor. It's just that it was perhaps a more limiting platform. Remember, it's a Mondeo, and to create, a Mercedes competitor, then you have to work hard to do that. And by then, of course, the overhangs, the front overhang was quite long. Other dimensions were, as I said, the width. You have to have a certain heft in a car to create that upmarket appearance. And when you're following the second generation S80, you'll see it's quite slim.
There were holes in Ford's 5-year battle plan. Jaguar in particular had failed, with the X-Type being poorly received, and sales of the retro-look S-Type were slow. At least Volvo's sales were still rosy, but with Ford investing in new models, there were years when Volvo never made a profit. Despite the EUCD platform being smaller, the S80 actually grew a little in all directions, resulting in those longer overhangs. The shape would be an evolution from the first generation car styled by Todd Levy, but for a car that has a new platform, it looked remarkably similar to the old car. The new S80 would have Volvo's compact V8 developed with and produced by Yamaha in Japan, giving the car a 0 to 60 time of 6.5 seconds that would allow it to compete with the BMW M5. There was also a new inline 6 that would be shared with the Land Rover. Less exotic engines with the Mazda L 4-cylinder and Volvo 5-cylinder petrol and diesel from the previous S80, and even a 1.6-litre turbocharged Ford EcoBoost engine in some markets that got a decent 180 horsepower with a 0 to 60 time of 8.2 seconds. It would give the S80 a little eco-warrior credibility it had been so keen to get with the first generation car. But while the V8 could give the S80 a little BMW M5 power, it couldn't match its handling. That's not to say it was a terribly handling car. It was rather good actually, with a form of active suspension. But the S80 was designed to get you there in comfort and style, not to set a hot lap around your local racetrack. But then if you're in a Volvo showroom, that kind of performance wasn't top of your mind. What prospective Volvo owners wanted from the S80 was luxury cruising, and that's what the interior offered. The seats on the first generation had been praised for their comfort on long journeys, and the second generation were just as good, with perforated seats that could be ventilated to keep you cool on a hot day. And when it was cold, both front and rear passengers could enjoy heated seats. Side windows had thicker glass to reduce outside sounds. The new dashboard went for a chrome brush look and a logical set of buttons. This was just before touchscreens would take over many of these controls. Touchscreens, of course, are cheaper to produce and more flexible, but harder to use whilst driving. The Volvo controls on the first generation were equally simple to use, but one backward step was the bank of 4 knobs that controlled the audio and the climate. Reviewers criticised them, saying it was easy to inadvertently crank the audio to maximum when all you wanted was a warmer cabin. Phone integration with Bluetooth made its debut, and the centre console allowed you to connect to your new fancy iPod. The infotainment system could be spec'd with a DVD player and digital TV, reversing and panorama cameras. The new audio system used 12 speakers with Dolby Pro Logic that was so good that, at least according to Volvo's marketing people, it's easy to forget that you're actually in a car and not in a concert hall. I forget, am I in a Volvo S80 or a concert hall? An interesting new feature was the personal car communicator. In the days before smartphone apps that could monitor your car's status, this offered a small remote control that within 100 meters could tell you if your car was locked or not, or if the alarm had been triggered. As you approached your S80, the remote could trigger the car's lights, and you didn't have to unlock it, just pull the door handle, get in and press the start button. All very cool stuff for 2006. Of course, the new Volvo always needed more safety features. The whiplash prevention system was improved along with the side airbags. Volvo was sure to improve the pedestrian safety features to help improve that 2-star Euro NCAP rating. Lane departure warning and blind spot detection systems made it safer still. Adaptive cruise control could detect potential collisions and automatically brake. And swivelling headlights allowed you to see around corners like you were rocking a 1960s Citroën DS. The second generation S80 was unveiled at the 2006 Geneva Motor Show. Volvo and owners Ford were bullish about its prospects, estimating 50,000 sales every year, mostly from North America. That might not sound too many, but a flagship model, especially the executive version, provided a testbed for new features that would trickle down to the mainstream models, as well as providing an aspirational car in the showroom that helped sell the S40 and the S60. Ford's dreams of building a luxury European empire to take on BMW, Audi and Mercedes had taken a big knock with disappointing sales. It came crashing down with the Great Recession of 2008 that took its American rivals into bankruptcy and forced Ford to sell Aston Martin, Land Rover and Jaguar. It initially held on to Volvo, but mounting debts that led to massive layoffs at Volvo worried the Swedish government, who could see fellow Swedish carmaker Saab going the same way. Ford's growing debts forced them to put Volvo up for sale at the end of 2008, but who would be the buyer? Various options were pursued, including BMW, various Chinese and Russian investment companies, a Swedish government buyout, and there were even rumours that Volkswagen were interested. Eventually it was announced that Chinese car company Geely had concluded a deal to buy Volvo for £1.4 billion. 10 years earlier, Ford had bought Volvo for 3.5 times that amount and had invested heavily in its future, so it had truly been sold for a knockdown price. Yet it wasn't like Volvo was on the rocks. They had a solid lineup of cars and good sales. No wonder then, of course, that Ford had wanted to hold on to their Swedish outpost. But in 2008, Geely had the odds stacked against it. Car mergers, seen almost as a necessity to survive in the 1990s, had led to many disasters, from Daimler Chrysler to BMW and Rover, through GM and Saab to Ford and Volvo. And Geely were a company without a track record making luxury cars that sold on the world stage. Their strategy was to leave Volvo alone and let it do what Volvo did best, while giving them plenty of funding to succeed. Volvo chose to focus on the medium car sector, and that meant that cars like the S80 weren't high on the priority list. That wasn't surprising given the lackluster sales of the second generation car. The first sign of this shift was ending production of the V8 engine. With smaller engines delivering more and more power, a V8 in even an XC90 didn't make much sense, so 4, 5 and 6 cylinder engines would be the order of the day. Over the past 10 years, Ford had been slowly integrating Volvo, Jaguar, Land Rover and Aston Martin into the Ford supply chain. Selling each company left a mess. Yes, Volvo could use Ford's parts for a while, despite Ford's worries that Volvo's new Chinese owners would swiftly copy their parts. But over time, Volvo would need to develop new parts, from the smallest sub-assembly through engines to the whole platform. It helped that the EUCD platform was designed for smaller cars. It had already been used for the V70 and XC60 and would be used for the S60 and V60.
Well, Volvo is a very proud company, and the Swedes are very proud of their homegrown businesses. And I think there was some frictions about the direction we were taking, but Ford were the owners, and I think they respected Volvo. I think when they put the Brit in charge, he had that nice balance. But I think I could sum it up, the difference between the Ford years at Volvo and the Geely years at Volvo. I would say that, in a nutshell, Ford came to tell us what to do, and Geely came to ask us what to do. And that's a big difference. And I think that's where the current success stems from, allowing, as Chairman Li Shufu said, let the tiger free in the forest.
Volvo still had one version of the S80 in the pipeline, the S80L. 14 centimetres longer than the regular S80, this gave more than 1 metre of rear legroom. It was sold in China and pitched towards dignitaries and the very rich, with the same luxuries that had graced the executive version of the first generation car. The second generation S80 got a few small updates. In 2009, the grille got a larger badge along with a bit of chrome bling. New diesel engines appeared a year later, including a frugal 1.6. There was the option of ordering the car with a sport setup that improved cornering, along with a sporty R-design interior. A DAB radio and new infotainment system with Bluetooth streaming kept the car relevant. Another small update appeared in 2014 to the front and rear bumpers. The inscription package, like the executive version, provided a little luxurious individuality. Features included sovereign high leather seats, high gloss walnut wood inlays and a special trim. The infotainment system could be connected to those intertubes through a snazzy 3G connection, and like most of these systems, customers avoided them and just used their smartphones. And the dashboard got all digital with the adaptive digital display, borrowed from the V40 and offering tailored experiences depending upon the driving mode. Further safety features appeared, such as a system that would automatically brake for pedestrians and cyclists. The S80's diesel engines continued to improve, delivering 71 miles per gallon. And with a turbocharger, it wasn't a gutless wonder either, with a 0 to 60 time of 8.4 seconds. When the second generation S80 launched, Volvo expected sales of 50,000 every year. The result was disappointing. Customers continued their exodus to SUV platforms and saloon sales continued to dip. There would be a replacement though, the S90 in 2016, based on Volvo's new SPA platform that they designed for their next generation vehicles. While sales in Volvo's traditional market of North America have tailed off, sales in Geely's home market have actually blossomed. While sales of the S80 didn't match expectations and Volvo didn't manage to break into the luxury category ruled by the German car companies, Volvo under Geely has managed to thrive to the point where they sold over 700,000 cars in 2019, the highest in the company's history. And they're planning for the future with the acquisition of the Polestar brand that sells EV versions of their mainstream cars. Volvo is electrifying their entire range. The Polestar 5 is supposed to be a large luxury saloon that will arrive in 2025, so maybe this will be the continuation of the S80 lineage and will help Volvo sales to thrive. After all, the S80 has survived the acquisition of an American automotive giant and the fire sale shotgun wedding with a Chinese upstart. Surely it can survive a switch from petrol to electricity. Again, many thanks to Peter Horbury. When he's not talking to someone with a Lego obsession, he's hard at work helping Lotus with their latest cars. He also started Geely Design, which now comprises 6 studios around the world, so at least he's keeping busy. There's a lot more details about the S80 in the full interview that's linked on the right. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.